in the foreign affairs policy of the 13th Party Congress. For the first time, the Communist Party of Vietnam clearly defined the position and pioneering role of foreign affairs in preserving a peaceful and stable international environment, in mobilizing external support for the cause of nation building, and in enhancing Vietnam's status and prestige. This was once again emphasized in the National Conference on Foreign Affairs on implementing the resolution of the 13th National Party Congress held in Hanoi on December the 14th, 2021. This was the first national conference on foreign affairs organized by the Politburo and the Secretariat to discuss party diplomacy, state diplomacy, and the people-to-people policy of the whole political system.
Về đối ngoại, phải tiếp tục phát huy vai trò tiên phong trong việc tạo lập và giữ vững môi trường hòa bình, ổn định, huy động các nguồn lực từ bên ngoài để phát triển đất nước, nâng cao vị thế và uy tín của đất nước. Các nhiệm vụ này có quan hệ chặt chẽ, tương hỗ lẫn nhau. Trong đó, giữ vững hòa bình ổn định là nhiệm vụ trọng yếu thường xuyên, phục vụ phát triển đất nước là nhiệm vụ trung tâm, nâng cao vị thế uy tín của nước ta là nhiệm vụ quan trọng.
Hello and welcome to Talk Vietnam. For the first time ever, the National Conference on Foreign Affairs has been held by the Communist Party of Vietnam on a national scale. Notably, the event emphasizes on the pioneering role of diplomacy in preserving a peaceful and stable international environment, in mobilizing external support for the course of national building, and in enhancing Vietnam's status and prestige following the foreign policy that has been determined by the 13th Party Congress. So why is there such a need to elevate that understanding now? And how can we see it in everyday's life in all three pillars: party diplomacy, state diplomacy, and people's diplomacy? We will try to answer all those questions in our show today with the participation of Dr. Lê Đình Tĩnh, Director General of the Institute for Foreign Policy and Strategic Studies, Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam, who has a profound knowledge on the diplomacy of Vietnam. And we have Mr. Amiad Horowitz, a reporter of the People's World and member of the Communist Party, USA, who also has an extensive research on President Ho Chi Minh's ideology and thoughts. Well, gentlemen, welcome to our show today.
Thank you.
Very glad to be here.
First and foremost, can you help us understand more about the notion of pioneering role of diplomacy? Why is it a new mindset shift of the Communist Party of Vietnam?
I think it's based on the new achievements and the new position of Vietnam. Vietnam finds itself much more involved in the international community, and therefore the diplomacy has to take a more upfront position in Vietnam's strategy. And as Vietnam joins more multilateral organizations and is involved in more peacekeeping missions, diplomacy is core to the success of those initiatives. So that's why it's coming to the forefront now.
Mm-hmm. In my opinion, there are three very basic reasons why Vietnam pursues a pioneering role for its own diplomacy. The first reason is diplomacy is a preferred method in international relations these days. So because of the analysis of the world situation right now, all comes to the point that the world situation is basically peaceful. Mm-hmm. Right? So it is a perfect time for us to promote relationships between countries.
Right.
So diplomacy is a preferred method for that matter. Mm-hmm. And the second reason is because Vietnam is deeply integrated into the international community, from political to security to economic and cultural exchange. So because we are a very much globalized country, we need diplomacy, right, to solve the issues between Vietnam and the rest of the world, and to take advantages of the favorable conditions brought to us from the international community. And the third reason is diplomacy assumes a pioneering role because in the security sense, diplomacy is the first line of defense, as we often say. And diplomacy also helps connecting, economies, business partners together, right? So diplomacy also can help economic and development goals.
Right.
And at a time when we really need to promote the prosperity goal for Vietnam. For example, Vietnam wants to become a developed nation by 2045, right? So we need economic diplomacy to help with that goal. And also because we want to become a responsible member of the international community, we need diplomacy to take a few steps forward to ensure with our friends and partners that Vietnam wants to contribute and Vietnam wants to play by the rules. Vietnam respect international law and act as a responsible member of this world. So for that reason, diplomacy really matters. And in return, Vietnam will earn a higher credit from the international community for that role.
Yeah.
So in a word, the pioneering role for diplomacy is a logical next right step for Vietnam.
So from what I understand, the meaning of pioneering is actually the first one to do something, right? To open the
Correct.
way, to pave the way for something.
Correct.
And because Vietnam joined the global arena, so it means it has to be more proactive
Correct.
in doing everything. And diplomacy is a preparation, the first step preparation for integration.
On the 2nd of September 1945, at Hanoi's Baoding Square, President Ho Chi Minh read the Declaration of Independence, which announced the birth of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. This was also Vietnam's first diplomatic message to the world, affirming that Vietnam earnestly wishes to maintain friendship and sincere cooperation on the basis of equality and mutual assistance and create long-lasting world peace. In its early days, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam had to deal with countless challenges, of which its three major enemies were famine, illiteracy, and foreign invaders. Despite the difficulties, the party was determined to use foreign affairs as a sharp weapon to deal with enemies and at the same time gain the recognition and support of the international community to gradually bring the country out of danger. Under the leadership and wise instruction of President Ho Chi Minh, the country's first foreign minister, step by step, Vietnam steadfastly implemented its foreign policy of being ready to make friends with all democracies and hold no enmity with anyone, as well as use immutability to cope with uncertainty, thereby contributing to Vietnam's independence, maintaining the fledgling government. In the struggle for national liberation and reunification, through many documents and resolutions, the party has determined that foreign affairs must closely coordinate with politics and the military to be able to implement the talk-fight strategy. At the same time, the country needs to strengthen its solidarity with neighboring countries and socialist countries, as well as communicate with fraternal parties to expand relations with world people's movements. The tireless diplomatic efforts of the party, state and people have created an unprecedented international front to support Vietnam in its struggle for national independence. The resounding victory of foreign affairs policies during that period marked a milestone in the nation's history with the Geneva Agreements in 1954 and the Paris Peace Accords in 1973, creating extremely favorable conditions that led to Vietnam's 1975 spring victory for the country's reunification. During those heroic years, foreign affairs contributed to developing Vietnam as a role model and encouraging many countries and peoples around the world to fight for their independence.
chúng ta không những là đã tranh thủ được sự ủng hộ của các nước sau chủ nghĩa lúc bây giờ, nhất là Liên Xô, Trung Quốc, phong trào không liên kết, các cái diễn đàn quốc tế, mà chúng ta còn tranh thủ được hàng triệu những người có lương tri trên thế giới, những người là yêu chuộng hòa bình và công lý.
With a deep awareness that national interests are the highest goal of foreign affairs, in the đổi mới period, the three pillars of party diplomacy, state diplomacy, and people-to-people diplomacy have been fulfilled to preserve a peaceful and stable international environment, mobilize external support for the cause of national building, and enhance Vietnam's status. According to Professor Vladimir Kolotov, Vietnam's pioneering foreign policy is reflected in the fact that it helped assess and forecast situations, as well as identify opportunities and challenges to protect the country early and from afar.
President Ho Chi Minh once wrote that the country must be able to predict what's to come. If a country wants to protect its interests in foreign affairs, one needs to have a pioneering mindset and anticipate how our partners will act. Meanwhile, at the 13th Party Congress, the Communist Party of Vietnam set a task of prioritizing the stability of Vietnam in any situation, and to do so requires predictions about global development.
Many foreign allies have also assessed that thanks to the motto of knowing oneself, knowing others, and knowing the times, Vietnamese have pioneered in the country's status and reputation as a leader and mediator in undertaking international responsibilities and actively as well as responsibly contributing to the common concerns of the world.
In 2021, Norway, together with Vietnam, is working as members of the UN Security Council. I've been closely following Vietnam's actions at the UN Security Council and have seen Vietnam's proactive and dedicated role. You have worked with other members in the search for constructive and balanced solutions and shown pragmatism in order to reach broad consensus on resolutions and statements from the Council. I was impressed with your ambitious agenda and high-profile signature events in the Council.
With the task of mobilizing external support for the country's development, in its foreign policy, Vietnam has taken advantage of favorable international factors and signed free trade agreements and international commitments to enhance the self-reliance of the economy and national synergy.
The U.S. was obviously very tough on the requirements for the TPP, but Vietnam did it. You know, it shows that Vietnam is able to handle complicated negotiations and reach success. You know, and some of the other countries at the lower level were not able to come in, and very few other countries have been able to meet the standard.
It's a mission from your tradition and, of course, the ideological spirit, which is in the basis of the policies of the party and the government. A system based in solidarity, in common effort.
So now it's a question about tactic, and it's actually a quite interesting one. It's about the binh thư yếu lược, the resume of military tactics written by Hưng Đạo Vương Trần Quốc Tuấn. And he emphasized harmony is a very good moral in governing the country and administering the army. If there is harmony in the country, soldiers will be rarely used. If it is harmonious outside the border, there is no fear of war. So how do you see it apply in foreign policy in the past 35 years of đổi mới?
After đổi mới, and Vietnam decided to open up and develop peaceful relationships with all nations, right? So Vietnam settled the conflict in Cambodia, settled an agreement with China on the northern border. Those were both in 1991. In 1995, was able to normalize relations with the United States and lift the embargo. right, and create a condition of harmony, which has removed the immediate strategic threat to Vietnam and allowed Vietnam to grow and prosper, and creating the harmony outside allowed for harmony inside.
Right. But was it very difficult for Vietnam to achieve that harmony?
Yeah, so harmony is very basic component of the modus operandi of the Vietnamese diplomacy. First, I don't think that the Vietnamese diplomacy wants anything that is extreme, right? We want everything to be in harmony, harmonious, and working well with one another from one component to the other, from the inside and the outside. And the harmony is also is a way to achieve a greater synergy, okay, between the internal strength of the nation and the strength of the time, right? So harmony is, in my view, is both philosophical and is also an art, right?
And I think the materialist, Marxist-Leninist approach of the Communist Party of Vietnam lends itself to that, avoiding extremes, like you said, right? And really understanding the conditions that Vietnam finds itself in, that the world finds itself in, and acting accordingly, and not falling into the pitfalls of idealism and extremism. Vietnam avoids that.
But do you think it's actually quite difficult to be able to balance, right, the relationship with major powers, because major powers are actually very competitive with each other now?
I think, at its core, Vietnamese diplomacy is built on solid foundations that, despite the difficulty of the balance in trying to maintain peaceful relationship with major powers, that solid foundation lends itself to those ends. For example, the four no's, right, in Vietnamese foreign policy are integral in avoiding that sort of entangling competition between major powers, right? So, by avoiding entering any alliances against another country, or alliances at all for that matter, and not allowing other countries to put troops or bases in Vietnam, Vietnam is in a position where it can approach things more multilaterally and more balanced and find that harmony. So it really comes down to the foundations that allow for Vietnam to do that, and it's very admirable because a lot of countries don't accomplish that.
Right. So maybe that's one of the reasons why you came and stayed, right?
Among them. I lived in places that there was always conflict, whether it was local or a threat of international. And Vietnam is a peaceful country. And so many Americans have, in their head, all they think about Vietnam, they think about the war. But that was America and that was France before that brought war to Vietnam. That's not something the Vietnamese seek. We see that. Vietnam is a peace-loving country, and it does somersaults diplomatically to maintain that peace. And it's very admirable in this international community.
Yeah.
The image of Vietnamese party and state leaders at major global multilateral forums has affirmed Vietnam's commitment to being a reliable partner and responsible member of the international community. This has also cemented the country's proactive direction in multilateral diplomacy, thus enhancing Vietnam's role in shaping multilateral institutions and contributing to international forums.
Chúng ta hết sức chủ động, tích cực để đưa cái tầm của chúng ta ra quốc tế. Hay còn nói là chúng ta nâng cao cái vị thế của đất nước chúng ta thông qua việc chúng ta đã 2 lần là thành viên của Hội đồng Bảo an Liên Hợp Quốc. Chúng ta là chủ tịch của ASEAN 2 lần, cũng như chủ tịch của Liên minh Quốc hội của các nước ASEAN 2 lần. Đồng thời thì chúng ta lại tổ chức và là chủ nhà của nhiều diễn đàn quốc tế hết sức quan trọng.
Vietnam has successfully fulfilled its role as coordinator and launched numerous important initiatives to solve international issues at global multilateral forums.
Điều đặc biệt của ý nghĩa là chúng ta đã mang cái phong cách Việt Nam, cái bản sắc Việt Nam đóng góp vào quá trình mà Hội đồng Bảo an xử lý các điểm nóng, bảo vệ hòa bình an ninh quốc tế. Và đấy chính là cái điều mà các nước đánh giá rất cao.
In terms of regional cooperation mechanisms, Vietnam has always affirmed and promoted its leadership role to promote cooperation, peace and security in the region and respond to challenges, especially COVID-19.
Despite having to deal with the impact of COVID-19 and natural disasters in many areas, Vietnam has provided strong leadership in keeping the region cohesive.
So there's one saying in Vietnamese, and it's a proverb: knowing oneself, knowing others, we can win anytime. So do you think that that proverb reflects the foreign policy today of Vietnam?
Very much so. You know, Vietnam is friends with almost every nation on earth, have high-level, comprehensive or strategic friendships with 30 of the richest nations and Security Council members in the UN. Vietnam is a member of, the active member of the UN and ASEAN and APEC and any number of international organizations. This allows Vietnam to know the international community, be aware of the desires and concerns and problems of other countries, and be prepared for any of changing conditions that those might lead to.
So in diplomacy, we often say this thing, it takes two to tango, right?
Yes,
it takes two to tango. So it's not just our selfish concern, but also we need to put ourselves in the position of others, right? So if diplomacy can be done that way, it is a lot more effective.
Right. And I remember when Vietnam was selected as the non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, we won with a very high vote. And many other countries voted for us. So why so? Is that because we really know ourselves and really know our friends, so that being in that group, we can speak for others, countries as well?
Vietnam avoids selfish nationalism, right? So Vietnam will use that role for the betterment not just of Vietnam, but of the global community at large. Hence why Vietnam is so interested in expanding its role in peacekeeping, because that is using the tools that Vietnam has to help improve other countries and the lives of people around the world.
The cause that has been promoted by Vietnam really fits into the concerns and the priorities of other countries as well. So that really gives Vietnam the advantage in convincing the international community to support Vietnam in the voting process.
Right.
And it also has to do with the diplomatic skills exercised by the Vietnamese diplomats, particularly those who are working in the domain of multilateral diplomacy. I would give them a big round of applause for working around the clock and using really high caliber diplomatic skills, to arrive at that very, impressive outcome.
Do you have any comments on the skills of Vietnamese diplomats that you witnessed?
Well, in the way that it's affected my life in the last year and a half living here, I watched Vietnam go from one of the least vaccinated countries to one of the most vaccinated countries, and that was due to the skill of diplomats, both the professional, government and party diplomats, but also people-to-people diplomacy, right? There was no meeting that happened between Vietnamese officials and a foreign agency or government that did not bring up the issue with vaccines. And when I would talk to my family back in the U.S. and they'd say, I'm still not vaccinated, they would be so worried. And I said, no, I trust things here. I know it will be okay. And very quickly, through the efforts of these very skilled diplomats and very sincere relationships that they have built over the years, they're able to change the situation almost on a dime.
Yeah. So the vaccine diplomacy is impressive, right? For the past 1 year that we see the results. Do you have any comment on this?
So diplomacy, does have a role to play in that process by working around the clock for vaccines, and we call it vaccine diplomacy. So the Vietnamese embassies overseas, for example, they leave no stone unturned to find the sources of vaccine for the people back home. And I think what is really featured prominently in the Vietnamese vaccine diplomacy is the across-the-board coordination, between the capital and the embassies around the clock to make sure that we have the quickest access to vaccines.
Right.
Many of them acquire the COVID-19 themselves, because they decided to go to unhealthy spaces just to function as a diplomat. So many of my colleagues actually had been exposed to the COVID-19.
So I think besides the doctors, so those diplomats are also unsung heroes, because thanks to them that we can get the vaccines and can roll it out to the people.
At the 13th Party Congress, the party identified the three basics constituting pillars of Vietnam's comprehensive diplomacy as building a comprehensive and modern diplomacy with a focus on the three pillars of party diplomacy, state diplomacy, and people-to-people diplomacy. Party diplomacy is a diplomatic channel that focuses on promoting relations with political parties around the world, many of which play a strategic role in bilateral relations and, at the same time, actively participate in shaping the party's foreign policies, guidelines, and viewpoints. Up to now, the Communist Party of Vietnam has developed relations with 247 parties in 111 countries, affirming the role and position of party diplomacy as an important pillar in Vietnam's comprehensive foreign policy. In 2015, General Secretary Nguyễn Phú Trọng paid an official visit to the United States. At the White House, for the first time, the head of the Communist Party of Vietnam held talks with the President of the United States to further deepen the relationship between the two countries.
Chuyến thăm nó cho thấy rằng cái hoạt động đối ngoại của Đảng nó không chỉ góp phần củng cố cái nền tảng chính trị trong cái quan hệ của chúng ta với các nước láng giềng, với các nước xã hội chủ nghĩa hay là với các nước bạn bè truyền thống, mà nó còn góp phần củng cố cái lòng tin, tạo dựng cái khuôn khổ với lại các cái đối tác quan trọng khác, kể cả các cái đối tác mà không cùng cái hệ thống chính trị xã hội với chúng ta. Nó cho thấy cái lòng tin và nó cho thấy cái sự coi trọng cái quan hệ đặc biệt của Mỹ đối với lại Việt Nam chúng ta.
Thì trong thời gian tới là chúng ta làm sao đóng góp vào cái việc nâng cao cái khả năng về tham mưu chiến lược. Vấn đề rất quan trọng nữa là làm sao huy động được toàn bộ hệ thống chính trị vào cái công tác đối ngoại Đảng để thực hiện nhiệm vụ chung, và chúng ta làm sao đổi mới và đa dạng hóa các hoạt động đối ngoại của Đảng.
Vietnam's deeper and more comprehensive international integration process is a foundation for state diplomacy to promote its strong role in building diplomatic relations with countries around the world, according to its motto of ensuring the nation's interests and taking people's as the center. Up to now, Vietnam has established diplomatic relations with 189 countries, of which 17 are strategic partners and 13 are comprehensive partners. This contributes to protecting national independence, sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity, as well as maintaining a peaceful and stable environment, and at the same time, opening up many markets and accessing various external sources of capital, technology, and intellectuals to serve the country's industrialization and modernization targets. In particular, vaccine diplomacy has contributed to bringing over 115 million doses of vaccines to the country, ensuring we have a sufficient amount of vaccines for all people.
Trong cái giai đoạn tới, chúng tôi cần quyết tâm xây dựng cái ngành ngoại giao toàn diện, hiện đại, vững mạnh. Trong đó cái điều cốt yếu nhất là xây dựng được một cái đội ngũ cán bộ ngoại giao toàn diện về chính trị, về tư tưởng, về đạo đức và trí tuệ, hiện đại và chuyên nghiệp.
Meanwhile, people-to-people diplomacy has great advantages in terms of the variety of participants, which include the Fatherland Front, domestic socio-political organization, foreign organization in Vietnam, as well as associations, localities, businesses, and individuals. The positivity and proactiveness of each member in the process of building friendships and mobilizing external resources have made comprehensive contributions to the process of building and developing the country's social economy over the years. In 2021, the difficulties caused by the COVID-19 pandemic have brought numerous challenges to people-to-people diplomacy. But through hardships, it also shows the sharing and joint efforts of all organizations, people, and overseas Vietnamese together with international friends. Vietnam has provided medical and financial aid to 50 countries and international organizations. In addition, people-to-people diplomacy also calls for successful contribution to the fight against the pandemic in the country through the Fatherland Front and mass organizations. These are just a few examples of the many people-to-people diplomatic efforts that have been made over the past year.
Chúng ta phải tranh thủ tất cả mọi kênh. Chúng ta phải thông qua rất là nhiều các cái đối tác khác nhau, kể cả là các đối tác bạn bè truyền thống, cũng như là mở rộng thêm cái sự tham gia của doanh nghiệp, rồi là của giới trẻ, của các nhà tri thức, khoa học, quan hệ hợp tác với lại các cái tổ chức phi chính phủ để huy động được một cách cao nhất cái nguồn lực quốc tế để phục vụ Việt Nam, phục vụ cái sự phát triển của đất nước.
13th Party Congress set the goal that by 2030, Vietnam will become a high middle income country and a high income developed country by 2045. With its role, the foreign sector will continue to promote Vietnam's tradition and achievements to support the country's breakthroughs in a new period.
So now I want to quote Party Chief Nguyễn Phú Trọng. And he once said in the 30th Diplomatic Conference, and he emphasized that foreign affairs need to renovate thinking. So foreign diplomacy must be more innovative and creative. So do you see that in recent foreign affairs activities of Vietnam?
You know, we see the start with the Trump-Kim summit is something that Vietnam hadn't done before, and it was trying new things and again renovating and being creative. I think also in a lot of the approach to the diplomacy at the early stage of the pandemic, when Vietnam was in a position to help more countries and supply with other countries with medical supplies and personal protective equipment. Those were things that Vietnam hadn't necessarily had to do before, but adapted to the condition.
Under the chairmanship of Vietnam, during the ASEAN Chairmanship 2020, there were more than 60 initiatives put forward by Vietnam to the association. So that is a vivid example of creative diplomacy, right? And another example was during the 2 years of Vietnam at the UN as a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. Vietnam also put forward a lot of initiatives. For example, one of the initiatives was the proposal by Vietnam to the international community for the International Disease Preparedness Day. So those are the very specific examples of the Vietnamese diplomacy being creative. But the word innovative diplomacy also implies other things. For example, innovative diplomacy might point to new forms of diplomacy being conducted by Vietnam. For example, digital diplomacy. The kind of diplomacy tapping into the digital platforms and social medias to promote the connection between Vietnam and the rest of the world, particularly at times of crisis and at times of the digital transformation and the fourth industrial revolution. So those are very specific examples that I would like to add to the innovative and creative diplomacy of Vietnam.
Are Vietnam fast in moving digital in diplomacy compared to other countries? It's quite new, right?
Because it's quite new.
Especially COVID.
When it comes to digital diplomacy, everybody is new, not just Vietnam. But Vietnam was quick to adapt to the situation. For example, during 2020, when Vietnam was the chair of ASEAN, so Vietnam switched a lot of meetings and discussions from the physical meeting to the virtual online meetings format. And even Vietnam proposed to sign some of the documents virtually. So in terms of the adaptiveness and the responsiveness, I think Vietnam is doing a good job in digital transformation. But of course, there is still a lot for Vietnam to, to fully take advantage of the advantages of the digital platforms.
Right.
I was told by one diplomat that he's busier than he ever was because there's less time in between things. You can go from one meeting in Moscow to a meeting in Madrid in 2 minutes because you just change your sign-in and there you are. So on the one hand, he's busier and more tired, but he's able to get a lot more done. And he was questioning whether things would ever go back to the physical because it was such a waste of time.
It's a very interesting example that you just gave.
Norway welcomes Vietnam's ambition of international integration and being a responsible international partner. During the challenging time with the COVID-19, Vietnam was able to effectively deal with the COVID-19 at home, as well as showing excellent leadership of ASEAN. Your commitment to enhancing ASEAN cohesion in dealing with the COVID-19 and stepping up economic recovery and to giving ASEAN a more visible voice at the global level is very important. It has definitely elevated Vietnam's position and reputation in the regional setting, as well as among the broader international community.
I think Vietnam's diplomatic network is well developed in terms of presence, and my personal experience is that Vietnam's diplomacy is manned by very capable men and women. Vietnam will be targeting carbon emission neutrality by 2050, as expressed at the COP26 in Glasgow by Prime Minister Chin, is evidence that Vietnam is pushing for both national as well as international sustainable growth.
I think Vietnam is shouldering a responsibility as a responsible actor to preserve a rules-based international order and to strengthen multilateral institutions. And as I said, I think it really comes down to what concrete results that is produced in the end of the day. When it comes to the climate, when it comes to gender equality, when it comes to conflict solution, human rights and economic and social development. So I look forward to continue this cooperation also in the multilateral sphere.
Of late, Vietnam has been very active and very forward-looking in carrying out foreign policies at the regional level. Vietnam was recently ASEAN chair and have done so very successfully. Vietnam has been a very, very active member in the United Nations. Vietnam has pushed many agendas. I have to highlight is the agendas on security issues that has been, Vietnam has aligned ASEAN agenda with the United Nations.
I do think that Vietnam is playing an increasingly leading role both in the region and internationally. And this is important for Australia because we view Vietnam as one of our most important partners in the Southeast Asia region, because I was posted here in the 1990s as a junior diplomat. And at the time, I saw firsthand the effect that Doi Moi was having on Vietnam's development and its economy. And really, Doi Moi laid the basis for Vietnam's later opening and engagement with the world in terms of foreign policy. So I saw the beginning of that, and I was not really surprised at how far Vietnam had come when I returned, because it's always very determined in what it sets out to achieve.
Last year, Vietnam ranked 12th in the Lowy Institute's 2020 Asia Power Index, thanks to the improvement of its diplomatic influence. So in your opinion, what is the biggest contributing factor to this result?
I think it would have to be Vietnam's greater role played in the multilateral organizations like the UN and like ASEAN. Vietnam held both those roles at the same time and was able to accomplish a great deal across the board. Again, off the top of my head, the signing of the trade agreement, the RCEP.
Yeah.
There were people that thought that couldn't be done. You know, it had been discussed for decades. But Vietnam was able to chaperone the path for ASEAN to come to an agreement, and now it's the world's largest trade agreement or partnership. So when the rest of the world sees those sort of successes, and on top of that, all the programs introduced at the UN, the peacekeeping, it's obvious that Vietnam's status would have to rise.
What constitutes the success of Vietnam's new foreign policy?
There are a lot of factors behind a success story. The efforts made by our own and the support from the from friends and partners all contribute to the success of Vietnam foreign policy. But I think some of the very basic things that we need to have to make a foreign policy successful. One is the right identification of goals. So you set the right goal for yourself. And secondly, the selection of tools and measures that are commensurate with the goals that we set for ourselves, and the mobilization of resources and the adequate mobilization of resources, both inside out and outside in, to make the initiatives in foreign policy feasible and viable. So that is a combination of different things.
Right.
But above all, I think the nature of the thing that we are doing really matters. So because Vietnam wants to contribute to the betterment of the public goods in the region and in the international community, for example, by participating in peace buildings and peacekeeping. The return later on becomes very good for Vietnam, because people trust Vietnam and they think that Vietnam can contribute. So it's a two-way street. It's very much an interactive exercise, I guess.
Well, thank you so much for the sharing today, both of you. It's very interesting insights to help us understand more about Vietnam's diplomacy over the years. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So after more than 35 years of renovation with stronger position and ability and higher synergy and international prestige, Vietnam is firmly on the path of innovation and deep integration. The Vietnamese diplomatic sector assumes a greater responsibilities of promoting its pioneering role to maintain a peaceful and stable environment, make the most of resources for development, and enhance country's international position. With such determination, I believe the bright future is right ahead. And thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining Talk Vietnam. And to the audience, see you next time.